On a cold December morning in 1943, high above the snow-dusted landscape of northern Germany, the air itself was a crucible of immense tension. For the young men locked in intense aerial combat, the sky was not merely a canvas for battle, but an unforgiving void where machines suffered catastrophic damage and lives were tragically lost in moments of intense danger. Yet in this brutal theater of war, where the stakes were immensely high, an act of profound and unexpected humanity was about to unfold, a moment that would defy the very logic of conflict and leave an indelible mark on two men from opposing sides. The Second World War represented an unprecedented escalation of global conflict, fundamentally reshaping the political and moral landscape of the 20th century. At its core lay a clash of ideologies and ambitions, consuming nations and generations in its relentless grip. For the Allied powers, particularly the United States and Great Britain, strategic bombing emerged as a central pillar of their war effort against Nazi Germany. The doctrine was simple, yet devastatingly complex in execution: to diminish Germany's industrial capacity, undermine its will to fight, and pave the way for a ground invasion through sustained aerial campaigns targeting its cities and factories. The tool for this immense task was often the heavy bomber, a symbol of industrial might and technological prowess. Among the most iconic was the American Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, a four-engine Leviathan renowned for its rugged construction and formidable defensive armament. Crews believed in its ability to withstand incredible punishment, a testament to its design and the unwavering optimism that surrounded it. Yet, the reality for bomber crews was far grimmer than the public perception. Their missions were not merely flights, but journeys into a maelstrom of intense anti-aircraft fire and relentless fighter attacks. Life as a bomber crewman was a precarious existence, a stark contrast to the relative safety of ground personnel. Young men, often barely out of their teens, were thrust into roles demanding immense courage, technical skill, and an almost superhuman ability to function under extreme duress. Their training, while rigorous, could never fully prepare them for the psychological and physical strain of sustained combat. Every mission brought with it the chilling statistics of attrition, a constant reminder of the thin line between survival and oblivion. The odds of completing a full tour of duty, typically 25 or 30 missions, were frighteningly low, fostering a unique camaraderie forged in shared fear and mutual reliance. Across the battle lines, the German Luftwaffe, initially the spearhead of the Blitzkrieg, found itself in an increasingly defensive posture. With the tide of war turning, their primary role became the desperate protection of the homeland against the ceaseless Allied bomber streams. German fighter pilots, skilled and courageous, faced a daunting challenge, intercepting heavily armed formations, often outnumbered, and flying aircraft that, while agile, were often outmatched in sheer defensive firepower by the bombers themselves. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf FW 190 became the workhorses of this aerial defense, piloted by men whose valor was undeniable. The psychological toll of this aerial war was immense on both sides. For the bomber crews, it was the persistent dread of flak bursts, the sudden appearance of enemy fighters, and the sight of comrades' aircraft suffering catastrophic damage or spiraling earthward. For the fighter pilots, it was the constant pressure to defend their homes, the intensity of engaging massive formations, and the knowledge that every attack carried its own mortal risk. Yet, even amidst this brutal exchange, a fragile, almost archaic code of conduct occasionally flickered into existence, a remnant of an earlier, more chivalrous era of aerial combat that most believed had long since vanished. Into this crucible of total war stepped two men whose lives, by all conventional metrics, should have been defined solely by their roles as adversaries. One was an American, Charles L. Brown, a fresh-faced lieutenant with the U.S. Army Air Forces, barely old enough to shave, entrusted with the command of a B-17 Flying Fortress and its 9-man crew. The other was Franz Stigler, a seasoned German Luftwaffe ace, a man steeped in the traditions of aerial combat, with a burgeoning tally of victories and a deep-seated ethical code that, on this particular day, would be tested to its absolute limits. Charlie Brown hailed from Weston, West Virginia, a young man of modest upbringing who found himself drawn to the exhilaration and challenge of military aviation. He joined the Army Air Forces with an earnest desire to contribute to the war effort, embodying the youthful idealism prevalent in America at the time. His training progressed steadily, culminating in his assignment as a bomber pilot. By December 1943, he was a first lieutenant, the commander of a B-17 crew designated Ye Olde Pub, a name painted with a playful, almost defiant spirit on the aircraft's nose. His crew was a microcosm of America itself, a diverse group of young men from various backgrounds, united by their shared mission and the bonds forged in the intense pressure of combat training. They were relatively new to the European theater, still possessing a degree of youthful optimism tempered by the stark realities of their initial missions. Franz Stigler's path to the cockpit of a Messerschmitt Bf 109 was markedly different. Born in Bavaria in 1915, Stigler's father had been a pilot during World War I, instilling in him an early fascination with aviation and a deep appreciation for the traditions of aerial combat. Stigler himself joined the Luftwaffe in 1935, initially serving as a flight instructor, a testament to his exceptional piloting skills. His combat career began in earnest with the invasion of Poland, and he served on multiple fronts, including the Eastern Front and North Africa, steadily accumulating aerial victories. By December 1943, Stigler was an experienced Oberleutnant, a highly decorated ace with 27 confirmed kills, a veteran of countless dogfights, and a survivor of numerous harrowing encounters. But beyond his formidable skill as a fighter pilot, Stigler possessed an unwavering moral compass, a personal code of conduct shaped by the lessons of his early mentors. Most significant among these was Gustav Rödel, a respected Luftwaffe Geschwaderkommodor, who imparted a philosophy deeply rooted in the concept of chivalry. Rödel's teaching emphasized that combat was against the machine, not the individual, and crucially, that one never shot at a pilot bailing out of a crippled aircraft, nor should one attack an aircraft that was clearly defenseless and beyond saving. This code, a relic of a bygone era, had largely been abandoned in the merciless skies of World War II, but Stigler held it close, a silent promise to himself in the brutal symphony of total war. This deeply ingrained principle would define his actions on that fateful December day, setting him apart from the relentless ferocity demanded by his duty. The morning of December 20th, 1943, dawned cold and bleak over Thorpe Abbotts, the base of the 379th Bomb Group in England. For Lieutenant Charlie Brown and the crew of Ye Olde Pub, it marked their first combat mission to Bremen, a heavily industrialized port city in northwest Germany, a vital hub for U-boat construction and aircraft manufacturing. The target was designated as a priority, and intelligence reports indicated that the defenses would be formidable. The pre-mission briefing was sobering, outlining the expected flak concentrations and the likelihood of fierce fighter opposition. A palpable tension hung in the air as the crews prepared, the familiar routine of strapping into parachute harnesses and checking equipment doing little to quell the gnawing anxiety that preceded every flight. The weather conditions added another layer of peril. Temperatures at altitude would plummet to well below freezing, posing a constant threat of frostbite and equipment malfunction. The B-17s, packed into tight formations for mutual defensive fire, took off in the dim morning light, their engines roaring, lifting their heavy loads of bombs and fuel into the unforgiving sky. The journey across the North Sea and into German airspace was long and uneventful for the initial hours, a period of quiet apprehension before the inevitable storm. The crews maintained strict radio silence, their eyes scanning the vast expanse for any sign of danger, the monotonous drone of the engines the only constant companion. As the formation approached the Dutch coast, the first signs of German defenses appeared. Scattered puffs of anti-aircraft fire, distant and relatively harmless, a prelude to the onslaught to come. But as they pressed deeper into German territory, nearing Bremen, the flak intensified dramatically. Black bursts blossomed in the sky around the formation, some exploding with unnerving proximity, their concussive force rattling the heavy bombers. The metallic smell of burnt cordite began to permeate the aircraft. The mission was entering its most dangerous phase. Then came the fighters. Swarms of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, diving out of the sun and climbing from below, launched their coordinated attacks. The tightly packed formation of B-17s became a formidable aerial fortress, its numerous machine guns unleashing streams of tracer fire. Yet, the German pilots were relentless, often flying through the defensive fire to get close enough for a decisive blow. It was an intense and chaotic aerial engagement, where survival often hinged on split-second decisions and sheer luck. Ye Olde Pub, flying at the back of the formation, found itself in the thick of the fiercest fighting. A devastating salvo of anti-aircraft fire struck the bomber first. The No. 2 engine, on the inner left wing, was hit directly, its propeller spinning wildly before grinding to a halt, emitting smoke and shrapnel. Shortly after, the No. 4 engine on the outer right wing also took a critical hit and began to fail. The plane lurched, its speed dropping, struggling to maintain altitude. The defensive power of the formation was immediately compromised, leaving Brown's aircraft more vulnerable to the increasingly aggressive fighter attacks. German fighters, sensing a wounded prey, converged. The bomber sustained catastrophic hits. The navigator, Lieutenant Spencer G. Peck, was tragically lost, and the bombardier, Lieutenant Al Sadok, along with the tail gunner, Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode, were severely wounded. Critical systems failed. The oxygen supply was compromised, leading to hypoxia for some crew members and impairing their ability to function. Rudder controls and the entire hydraulic system were shot out, rendering the aircraft incredibly difficult to steer and leaving essential functions, like landing gear deployment, to manual, desperate effort. Despite the catastrophic damage, Charlie Brown, barely 21 years old, displayed remarkable composure. He struggled with the controls, fighting to keep Ye Olde Pub airborne, a desperate battle against gravity and the relentless attacks. With 2 engines failing and numerous systems compromised, the bomber began to fall out of formation, becoming an isolated target, limping across the sky. Brown ordered the remaining bombs to be dropped manually, even though they were still far from the primary target, hoping to lighten the aircraft and regain some control. The mission for Ye Olde Pub had become a desperate fight for survival, a testament to the crew's training and Brown's unwavering determination to bring his men home. As Ye Olde Pub fell away from the protective embrace of its formation, a lone, crippled metallic bird against the vast, unforgiving sky, its fate seemed sealed. It was a common sight in the brutal air war over Germany, a straggler too damaged to keep up, becoming an easy target for opportunistic German fighters. It was at this critical juncture, as Charlie Brown battled desperately to maintain control of his dying aircraft, that Franz Stigler, soaring high above in his Messerschmitt Bf-109 G6, entered the scene. Stigler, having just landed to refuel and rearm after a previous engagement, had quickly taken off again, determined to add to his score. He spotted the struggling B-17, limping below the cloud cover, alone and vulnerable. For an experienced ace like Stigler, this was a golden opportunity, an almost guaranteed victory that would bring him closer to the Knight's Cross, a prestigious decoration for valor. He began his approach, his heart undoubtedly quickening with the hunter's instinct, preparing to deliver the final blow. But as he closed the distance, the horrific extent of the damage to the B-17 became chillingly clear. He could see daylight through massive holes in the fuselage. The tail section was mangled, a testament to intense combat. 2 of its 4 engines were dead, their propellers frozen in place, symbols of catastrophic failure. He flew closer, perhaps too close for a cautious fighter pilot, driven by a professional curiosity that quickly morphed into something else entirely. He could make out the faces of the American crewmen inside, some huddled together, others tending to their wounded, their expressions a mix of fear, exhaustion, and despair. One of the waist gunners, a young man, was trying to clear his jammed machine gun, his exposed position and futile effort painting a picture of utter helplessness. A profound internal conflict seized Stigler. Every fiber of his being, every instinct as a combat pilot, urged him to engage, to fulfill his duty. This was his enemy, his opportunity. But stronger than the call of duty, stronger than the lure of another victory, was the echo of Gustav Rodel's words, a code of honor passed down from his mentor. "You are a fighter pilot, not a butcher. If I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will personally shoot you down myself. You fight by the rules of chivalry in the air." Stigler looked at the B-17, not as an enemy war machine, but as a flying wreck, its crew broken and defenseless, already defeated. To attack them now, he realized, would be an act of cruelty, not war. The decision was made, silently, in a fraction of a second, but with monumental moral weight. Franz Stigler would not open fire. Instead, he pulled his Messerschmitt alongside the crippled bomber, flying wingtip to wingtip, so close that Charlie Brown could clearly see the German pilot's face, his goggles pushed up onto his helmet. Stigler made eye contact with Brown, a moment of profound, unspoken communication across the chasm of conflict. Brown and his crew, terrified and bewildered, braced themselves for the final inevitable attack. But it never came. Instead, Stigler began to gesture. He pointed to the northeast, indicating neutral Sweden, which lay within reach of the struggling B-17. He seemed to be encouraging Brown to head in that direction to find safety. Brown, disoriented and unable to interpret the gesture fully, remained fixed on the course he believed would take him back to England. Stigler then flew under the bomber, checking for any further damage, perhaps ensuring that no crew member had bailed out to be attacked by other German pilots. He then positioned himself to the bomber's left, dangerously close, effectively shielding Ye Olde Pub from German anti-aircraft gunners on the ground who might have spotted the lone crippled aircraft. As they flew over German-occupied territory, Stigler remained a silent guardian. He stayed with the B-17 for several minutes, an agonizing period for the American crew who could not comprehend the German pilot's intentions. Was this a cruel game? Was he waiting for more German fighters to arrive? The tension inside Ye Olde Pub was unbearable. Brown himself, though bewildered, recognized the utter impossibility of the situation. This German pilot, an ace clearly capable of destroying them, was instead providing an escort. He was protecting them. Stigler continued his escort until they reached the North Sea, passing the German air defense boundary, beyond which Ye Olde Pub would be relatively safe from immediate fighter interception. He gave Brown a final, solemn salute, a gesture of respect and farewell, before banking sharply and turning his Messerschmitt back towards Germany. The entire encounter had lasted for perhaps 10 minutes, a span of time that felt like an eternity for the American crew, and a moment that would forever define the moral courage of Franz Stigler. Charlie Brown and his crew watched, stunned and relieved, as the German fighter disappeared into the vast expanse, leaving them to their improbable journey home. The journey back to England for Ye Olde Pub and its battered crew was still fraught with danger, even after Stigler's departure. The B-17 was a ghost of its former self, flying on only 2 engines, its control surfaces compromised, its fuselage riddled with holes that allowed the freezing air to buffet the injured men inside. The hydraulic system was completely inoperable, meaning the landing gear had to be lowered manually by a grueling hand crank. The crew, exhausted and traumatized, worked together with a new sense of grim determination, fueled by the knowledge that they had been granted an improbable second chance. Against all odds, Lieutenant Charlie Brown guided his crippled bomber to a successful, albeit rough, landing at Seething Airfield in England. The sight of Ye Olde Pub touching down was met with disbelief and awe by the ground crews and intelligence officers. The aircraft was a wreck, a testament to the ferocity of the combat it had endured. Its skin was damaged in over 2,000 places, vital systems were rendered inoperable, and the sheer number of holes defied belief. It was a miracle that it had made it back at all. Immediately upon landing, Brown and his crew were debriefed by Allied intelligence officers. They recounted the harrowing mission, the flak, the fighter attacks, the catastrophic damage, and the tragic loss of their navigator. But when they described the actions of the German pilot, the disbelief in the room was palpable. An enemy ace, escorting them to safety? It defied all military logic, all understanding of the brutal aerial war. The intelligence officers, concerned about the potential implications of such an act of sympathy or chivalry spreading among enemy pilots, issued a strict directive. Brown and his crew were ordered never to speak of the German pilot's actions to anyone outside their official debriefing. The story was to be suppressed, deemed a potentially dangerous narrative that could undermine the morale and resolve of Allied airmen. This order of silence weighed heavily on Charlie Brown. While relieved to be alive and eternally grateful for the German pilot's mercy, he was forbidden from acknowledging the act that had saved his life and the lives of his crew. The experience deeply affected him, forging an internal struggle between his gratitude and the enforced secrecy. He would carry the unspoken debt and the memory of that German pilot's face for decades, a silent burden of an event too extraordinary to be forgotten, yet too sensitive to be shared. Back in Germany, Franz Stigler faced his own silent ordeal. He had returned to his base, knowing that his actions, if discovered, would be considered treasonous. Assisting an enemy aircraft, even one so crippled, was a grave offense, punishable by court-martial and likely execution. He made no mention of the encounter to his superiors or fellow pilots, burying the secret deep within himself. He continued to fly combat missions, accumulating more victories and surviving numerous close calls, serving his country with distinction until the very end of the war. The war raged on, unforgiving and relentless. Both Brown and Stigler continued to face the daily horrors of aerial combat. Brown completed his tour of duty, the events of December 20th, a ghost he could never fully exorcise. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his heroism in bringing his crew home. Stigler, for his part, narrowly escaped death on several occasions, survived bailouts, and continued to fight with unwavering courage, eventually becoming one of the most decorated German aces of the war, a testament to his skill and resilience. He ended the war with 28 confirmed victories and a profound weariness from years of relentless fighting. As the war concluded, the world breathed a collective sigh of relief. Charlie Brown returned to the United States, transitioning back to civilian life, but the memory of the German pilot persisted. He could not shake the image of the Messerschmitt, flying alongside his doomed bomber, a symbol of inexplicable mercy. He pursued a successful career, but the unresolved mystery of his aerial guardian continued to gnaw at him. He periodically attempted to find the pilot, writing to various aviation magazines and veterans organizations, hoping someone would have a similar story, a missing piece of his own. Franz Stigler, after the German surrender, endured the harsh realities of post-war Germany. He was held as a prisoner of war for a time and then struggled to rebuild his life in a shattered nation. The secret of his wartime act remained buried, a private burden he carried, convinced that no good could come of revealing such an unconventional truth. He eventually moved to Canada in 1953, where he built a new life, working as a businessman and raising a family. He rarely spoke of his wartime experiences, choosing to leave the brutality of the past behind him. Decades passed, and the world changed dramatically. The Cold War came and went, new conflicts emerged, and the memory of World War II began to recede into history, though never fully disappearing. Yet, for Charlie Brown, the German pilot remained a vivid, almost haunting presence. In the late 1980s, spurred by his wife's encouragement, Brown intensified his search. He attended a reunion of former Luftwaffe pilots, a long shot, but a chance he couldn't pass up. He stood before a room full of his former adversaries and recounted the incredible story of December 20th, 1943, hoping that someone, anyone, might recognize the details. Remarkably, a letter was eventually published in a Luftwaffe Fighter Pilot Association newsletter, detailing Charlie Brown's incredible experience. This letter made its way to Franz Stigler, living quietly in Canada. As he read Brown's account, Stigler felt a jolt of recognition. The details matched his own vivid, deeply personal memory of that day. He recalled the crippled B-17, the exact damage, the desperate look on the American crew's faces, and his profound internal struggle. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he was the German pilot Brown had been searching for. Stigler, now in his 70s, promptly wrote back to Charlie Brown, detailing his own recollections of the event. His letter included specific, verifiable details that Brown had not mentioned in his published account, such as the exact model of Stigler's BF-109, the specific damage to Ye Olde pub, and the precise route he had taken to escort the bomber to the North Sea. These details served as irrefutable proof, confirming the extraordinary truth of the encounter. The men exchanged several letters, their initial correspondence filled with cautious hope and then overwhelming certainty. Finally, in 1990, nearly 47 years after their unlikely encounter in the skies over Germany, Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler met for the first time on solid ground. Brown traveled to Vancouver, Canada, where Stigler resided. Their reunion was deeply emotional, marked by a shared understanding that transcended their former roles as adversaries. They embraced two old men who had once been mortal enemies, now bound by an indelible act of humanity and an improbable twist of fate. Their meeting was not merely a brief encounter, it blossomed into a profound and lasting friendship. Brown and Stigler spent many hours together, talking, reminiscing, and filling in the gaps of each other's memories. They discovered a shared respect and admiration, two warriors who had found a common ground in the face of overwhelming adversity. Their story, once a suppressed secret, became a celebrated testament to the enduring power of compassion and the unexpected acts of grace that can emerge even from the darkest chapters of human history. The narrative of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler stands as a powerful anomaly in the annals of World War II, a war defined by its scale of destruction and the dehumanizing nature of total conflict. It reminds us that even in the most brutal of circumstances, individual conscience can prevail over institutionalized enmity. Their improbable encounter in the skies over Germany, an act of chivalry that risked one pilot's life and career to save another's, transcends the uniforms and flags of opposing nations. This story forces us to look beyond the simplistic narratives of good versus evil and acknowledge the complex moral landscape of war, where humanity can sometimes illuminate the darkest corners. It is a testament to the fact that even when locked in mortal combat, individuals retain the capacity for empathy, for mercy, and for an unwavering adherence to a personal code of honor. Their friendship, forged in the crucible of battle and solidified through decades of shared silence and eventual revelation, stands as an enduring beacon of hope. It reminds us that while the machines of war are designed for destruction, the human spirit, even amidst its terrible cost, can still choose compassion, proving that the deepest connections can sometimes be found in the most unexpected and terrifying places.